I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about the power of good. In metaphysical New Thought philosophy, we say so often, and we say on this program, that we live in our minds and not in the world. One of the things that we understand about the dynamic of our minds is that when we see good, when we think good, and when we act out of good, our lives are transformed. But even more importantly than that, we know and believe that the power of good is in the midst of every circumstance, isn't it, Iris?
Yes, it is, and we do mean every circumstance, because good comes of everything, and everything comes from and with good. And so there's an old saying, look to the good and praise it. And so we know that as we praise good, then more good occurs. And that which we think very often is not good turns out to be a blessing in disguise, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you and I, in both our counseling work and spiritual work, have found over and over again that in the difficulties and challenges of life, people need to really understand and realize that despite the appearances to the contrary, that something really good is going to come out of it. And we've talked a lot in this program, and you and I have talked a lot and experienced a lot in the last many years. Even people with horrible tragedies, seemingly horrible tragedies, such as terminal illness, where wonderful things have come out of that.
Yes, and we were just observing last week that at the church, for example, the people who are the most strong and most stalwart and help others are the ones who have gone through the most problems in their own lives. And they've come through victoriously, and so they're strong. It's just like near Carmel, there's that big evergreen tree that grows, and everyone's familiar with that picture of that large evergreen tree that grows there near Carmel, and the wind whips it every moment of every day almost, but it stayed strong and staunch, and it looks as if it's going to be there forever. And that's the way when the winds of fate whip people around in a very sometimes rude way, then they just become more strengthened. And it's a wonderful thing to see the human spirit prevailing through obstacles of that type.
And very often it does take some prompting or some assistance, whether it be counseling, professional counseling, or whether it be a supportive nature and circle of friends, to build a consciousness of understanding that good is in the midst of circumstances and situations. And of course, a lot of people are so negative about life in general that they're probably saying, well, what he's talking about is just totally crazy. But in fact, it's not at all, is it? Because we know that we can help people see that every experience in life has a good and real purpose. And the purpose may not be clear, but there is good in the midst of every circumstance and situation. And the other thing that I think we need to remind ourselves about is that the most negative experiences can bring about, as you just said, the most wonderful opportunities for us to be able to deal with circumstances, deal with challenges, and not only overcome them, but grow through the experience of them. And I'm just thinking about the number of people, especially in the last few years, who have been faced with losses of jobs and financial reverses, which doesn't have to do with just the last few years, but has to do, always happens. But so often when we talk to people, one of the things that we talk to them about in exit counseling and in reconstructing their lives, especially those who are faced with unemployment after many, many years, or those who are faced with financial reverses, is that out of this experience, something really good can happen. Now, we want to be sure that we're not telling people not to feel the way they feel, because we all need to feel the way that we feel. And so if we're hurt, if we're sad, if we're depressed, however it is that we feel, that's all right. But we also know that those negative feelings that come to us with the negative experiences of life, and those things that question us as persons, are the very experiences that should trigger in our hearts and in our minds the fact that we need to change our way of thinking. And if we change our way of thinking, then something really good and wonderful can come. And we know, too, that as people lose a job, and a relationship ends, or if financial difficulties come, or illnesses are faced, that in each of those circumstances, that as people are moved to accept the experience, and of course we don't accept it initially, but we respond to it as we would normally with an emotion, sometimes a negative emotion, and then we look at the experience and then go through the experience, which is very important. And as we go through the experience, then we're able to make the space for something good to happen and for something else to take its place. But if we continue in the negativity of the experience, there's no room for anything else to come in. And of course, we know that in relationships, that when a relationship ends or if a loved one or spouse dies, then if we hold on to that experience and we hold on to that relationship so tightly and we relive it and we continue to stay in the sadness and in the grief, then there's no room for anyone else to come in. And that's a reality. And so it is with employment, and so it is with finance, and so it is with health and all other experiences of life.
Yes, well, when we hang on to anything overmuch, overlong, then it's a detriment to ourselves. And I was talking with a young lady today whose husband had been married prior to their marriage, and he's older than she is, and so he's had more time in his home. And so they sold that house and moved to, well, in any event, they sold a certain house that he had lived in for many, many years. And he had so many things that he couldn't part with that he had to store them. And she said, I told him that he will never use those things. Why doesn't he just get rid of them and give them to Goodwill or something? And because they will use them in any way, even the towels that are threadbare, they will pack in bundles and sell them as rags. And so it was really, but that's one of the, that's just a simple example of how we all hang on to things. And I know my younger son said to me, because my house is really crowded with things too, and he said, don't you dare die before you clean out this place. And I told her that, and it made her laugh, because then her husband didn't seem quite so bad. But this is true for all of us. We have to consciously put the old aside and not hang on to it, and to allow the new to come in, because as long as we hang on to too much that's old, then there's not room, because everything displaces everything else. So until we are able to get to go beyond some of the older things, then the new, there's no place for the new.
Right. That's an absolute imperative, that we understand that nothing new can come into a place that's filled. And the issue of detachment and the issue of change and transition is, of course, what we talk about, again, in our counseling and in our spiritual work as well, that it is necessary for all of us to understand that life is a fluid experience, and it's not constant, thank heavens. And so we're constantly moving, we're constantly changing, and as a result, our mind has to change, and our environment has to change, and our person changes. We don't need to worry about that. All we need to do is look in the mirror to see that. And so the constancy of change reminds us of the fact that all of these things that we go through in life are meant for the good of our experience and to take us where we need to be. And from each of them, there's a lesson that can be learned, and from each of them, we can become stronger. Now, in the strengthening of ourselves, there's often pain, and there's suffering, and there's hurt, and that's all right, because life is a mixture of those good things and those hurtful things. And it's very, very important for people to understand that it's all right to hurt. It's all right to go through the roller coaster emotions of life. And what we know so well in our counseling work is we work towards helping people to go through the roller coaster experiences of life, but then to come out on the other side in a level of serenity and understanding and realization of the good that is there in their lives. And the good and the power of good is exactly what we're talking about today. And being able to see that good despite the appearances of life. Mary Baker Eddy, the foundress of Christian Science, and we quote her often and talk about her, was great at bringing us the spiritual dimension of seeing beyond appearances, looking beyond appearances, and understanding that the transient issues of life are constantly moving, and that they are not real. They're real for the moment, but we move beyond them, and so we need to see beyond what we see with our human eyes, and we need to do that with our minds. And of course, what we say so often is we live in our minds and not in the world. So the way that our minds operate, so if our minds can be trained in such a fashion that we can see good and only good, if we can see the most negative experience and go into it and go through the grief and go through the sadness and go through the pain that we have to, but as we go into that period of our life, decide that this isn't where I want to stay, it's not where I'm going to stay, and out of it something good and wonderful is going to happen.
Yes, and our faith is always justified when we maintain that air of faith. I remember years ago there was when I was very young, there was a lady whose baby was thrown from the car as she was driving, and that baby was killed, and it was unthinkable. And a mutual friend said to me, "You always seem to have something that helps people. Write that lady a letter." She lived in another city, and see if you can't make her feel better. Well, that was overwhelming to me because I thought, what can I say to that mother who's grieving? And so I asked my neighbor across the street, an older man, what could I say to that lady? I said, I really want to help her, but I don't know what to say. And he said, well, tell her that we don't know what lies ahead. We never do. And that her faith is going to be justified. And he told me several sentences, but I always remembered those. And I've always used those words to help other people because I don't think they can be beat. Because that's true. Our faith is going to be justified when we live it. And we don't know what lies ahead. And we don't know how, when we look in retrospect, we'll see that very painful incident in a much more different light, in a much different way. And so if we can just remember those things, remember that, then life is so much easier.
Absolutely. And give up asking why.
Yes.
And
yes.
give up blame. You know, those are the two issues that stop us from a psychological standpoint so often, is that we want to blame someone and we want to know why.
Yes.
Well, the fact is that in many instances, we're not going to know why. And in many instances, we don't need to know why.
Yeah.
One of the things that we find in metaphysics so often is metaphysicians and New Thought believers in a lot of ways always want to understand the why, and they want to analyze it. Well, that's all right if you get something from it and if you want to do that ever so briefly, but don't stay in that analysis. It's a little bit like psychotherapy. It doesn't make much sense to keep on doing the analysis if you don't get to the work. And what we want to do is get into the work of helping other people and helping ourselves to come out of and come through the experiences of life. And so it's very, very important that we not stay in those bad places and those negative places, and that we come out into the good of life. And really, life is good, and life is rich, and life is abundant, and life is filled with opportunities, and life is filled with all kinds of exciting variables. But we need to have that spirit within us, and we need to have that dynamic of mind, and we need to be cautious of how it is our mind is operating when we deal with the circumstances and situations of life. For some, it happens early, this change in their way of thinking. For others, it may not happen until the end of life, and sadly, it doesn't happen for some until they close their eyes to this life and open it to the next. But it would be wonderful, and of course what we're about in all of our work is trying to help people to see the good. And that's why the subject that we're talking about is so important, because seeing the power of good and claiming the power of good in the midst of every circumstance is an empowering and freeing reality of life. And it's not something that is ethereal and idealistic. It's practical, and it can change and transform human lives, spiritual lives, and physical lives, because we know, and you and I, and in our work, we talk so much about the mind-body-spirit connection. We make ourselves sick by the way that we think. We make ourselves sick, physically sick. We age because of the way that we think in many instances. And this power of good can strengthen us in mind, body, and soul, and can free us from all kinds of even infirmities and diseases. And we know that to be true.
Yes, and we also know from near-death experiences that others have related that it happens as we go over into the next life. And isn't it a wonderful thing to know that the way we go out determines how we are on the inner planes after death? And that so not only is it important throughout this lifetime, but it's important as we leave this lifetime. And we've seen that from so many different incidents that we know that it's true. And so it's a matter of life and death, isn't it?
It's a matter of life and life, because we know that that process takes place. And you and I have both worked, again, with a lot of terminally ill people, a lot of people who are coming to the point of making that transition. And the consciousness, the level of consciousness, and you and I have seen it over and over, that people go into death. The mind dynamic that they go into death with determines the quality of that death. Now, I'm not saying there's any such thing as a bad death, because we're all going to die and we're all going to go through that experience. But you and I have both seen people who are prepared in such a conscious way to go into and through that experience. And I'm just thinking of some cancer patients that we've worked with who have minimalized the pain that they've had, not only in the disease process, but in the dying and death process, because of what they were able to do with their thinking and their mind and the claiming and the expectation of good. And with that, make that transition very easily and peacefully, and also go through the disease process in a very very easy and positive way. And of course, we know it's hard. We know it's difficult, and we're not minimalizing that at all. But we have seen and we do know the power of our minds and our thoughts. And that's one of the great gifts that God's given us is our minds. And so often we think, well, our minds just function. Well, our minds don't just function at all. Our minds function the way that we have conditioned them to function. And we need to understand and realize that. And we wash our bodies and we do all kinds of things to improve our physical appearance, but so few of us want to do a whole lot to deal with our mental attitude. And that's very important. And of course, meditation is so important. And you spend a lot of time working with people on meditation and visualization, which is one way to claim the power of good, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it helps to center ourselves with divinity. And as we do that, then we're more at peace and we're more living in the light and living good. And everything happens for the good when we live in that way. The more serenely we can live, then the more we're able to really emanate spirituality into the world and into the people around us. Makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And in the second half of the program, we want to touch on how it is our feelings and our reactions to life do affect the people around us.
Yeah.
And so often we think, well, this is a person, it's up to me and it's affecting me, but it affects the family, it affects the community, it affects the circle of friends. And that mental attitude is so tremendously important. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
We do want to talk a little bit about how it is that our ideas and our feelings do affect the people around us. And we talk a lot about vibration. And, and for a lot of people, that's hard, a new word maybe, from a spiritual or psychological standpoint. But we do emit vibrations, don't we? And we say so often that we emit vibrations. And of course, the easiest way that I always am able to explain that to people is when we walk into a room or we meet someone, we'll immediately feel either good or bad or neutral about them. And of course, there are certain people who just emit this positive exuberance about life, and we feel so good about them, don't we?
Yes, and we feel better about ourselves when we're around someone like that. And it really behooves all of us to keep an stiff upper lip and to be cheerful around everyone. And there's times when we're all facing adversity and we can't do that, but we can do it to a point, and we owe it to life itself and to the people around us. And also, we're sought out when we live that way. More people want to be around us. But everything, as you often say, is energy, and energy is vibration. And so every thought we think, it registers somewhere, and every act registers somewhere. And so as we are consciously aware of that, then we're more apt to live a more upbeat life because we know that we owe it to others. And in families, you can always see when you enter a home where there's strife and turmoil and the children are not well behaved and there's interpersonal problems, you can always tell that. And when people come, for example, to church on Sunday morning, you can see those who are really uplifted and open and lighted, and those who are troubled. And we're all troubled at one time or another. It's not a dictum against someone if they're not really up all the time, because that would be probably not possible. But if we consciously try to, then we're able to do it more often.
We are, absolutely. And when you talk about that, it's very interesting. And we've talked a lot on this program and at the church and in our work about New Thought and metaphysical people and how they tend to live such radiant, long lives. And I just think about the people that we know who lived into their 80s and 90s vibrantly alive and so youthful because of their positive view of life, and because of the fact that they attract people to them who in turn strengthen them, and they are able to share their positive vibration with other people. And it is a reality that comes out and and back from person to person, and it transforms the countenance of people, and we see it over and over again. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be guaranteed that you're not going to get sick or that you're going to have a long life, but certainly the quality of our lives are determined by the dynamic of how it is that our minds operate and how much good we see and claim versus the negativity and the pain that we embrace. And we can see it in the faces of people, we can see it in the lives of people, we can see it in families, we can see it in companies, in some of the consulting that we do with businesses. We can see those companies that are able to see the potential of what they're going to accomplish and to see the power of good and claim it, versus the companies that are striving in a very competitive environment to just try to keep their head above water. And it's a very interesting thing. And, you know, we do, as you know, one of the things that I do is a lot of business consulting where we take these principles to businesses. But to take a business or an organization or a hospital or a nursing home and to take those people and transform their way of thinking, and then to see the business follow the transformation and to see the people follow the transformation. And of course, in business, we see CEOs all the time who are dynamic leaders, who are always the visionaries, who see the potential of good and success and prosperity, and they lead their people to that.
Well, the same thing happens in families, and when we do counseling with parents and families, husbands and wives and so forth, we see how when they are open to the other person's point of view, then everything changes for them. And I'm thinking of a young couple that I know, and the young man, the husband, was came to me for counseling last week, and one of the things he wanted to talk about, over the years, he's come to me from time to time about various things. This is the first time this ever happened. He wanted to address his jealousy, because they have 4 children, and his wife now is getting ready to get back out into the business world, and she doesn't stay home and look like a housewife all the time now. She dresses and looks different, and so he's very jealous. And so as we talked about that, he could see that his wife was just trying to really do her best in the business world, and she needs to make herself look, she needs to wear makeup, and she needs to wear a different type of clothing. And so, and then I talked with him about how she might feel her inadequacies, and she's addressing those and being defiant sometimes because she's not really sure of herself, because this is new to her, and she's back in the business world in a different way, and it's a different time now than when she was in the business world before. And so we talked about those things at fairly great length. So today he called and said, I just want to thank you for helping me to gain greater insight, because my wife and I discussed what you and I discussed, and he said, I told her some of the things you said because I wanted her to know that I'm understanding her situation. And he said, and it's making a great difference. And things aren't just perfect quite yet, but they're going to be. And isn't that a wonderful thing, that he sought greater understanding? And of course, you and I said in the past, what we do when we counsel is we show people their options. So by seeing his various options and his wife's various options, then he was able to look to the good and praise it.
See the good, and what that did for what that's doing for the children, what that's doing for the extended family, what that's doing for him. And I happen to know he works as well. His wife is going to work, and that goes out in such a dynamic way, and it empowers all of them, and it allows the children to see this process. And so the wonderful things that happen. In the last minutes that we have, we don't want to get away without talking about meditation and at least some guided imagery, because that's a very big part of what we promote. And so meditation, and of course for people in the West, people think, oh, this is something strange or bizarre, and we're not talking about anybody changing their religious beliefs or faith, but to meditate is simply to center ourselves in a quiet time, isn't it? And to have that ability to quiet ourselves. And let's talk just a little bit about that in the couple minutes we have left.
Okay, well, it's very trite to say prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening, but that's what it is, isn't it?
It is. Then that listening, and of course here in the West, we're not comfortable with being quiet. You know, being quiet's the last thing we want to do. Of course, you and I know, because we spend all of our time quiet listening to people. But if we quiet ourselves and we learn to enter into a meditative state, and some of that is helped, and you and I both do it. You do it much better because you devote so much more time to teaching people how to meditate and to meditation itself. But if we even take people through guided imagery and the guided meditations, we can teach people how to calm themselves and quiet themselves. And it requires going apart in the beginning. But then after a while, we can do it in the midst of wherever we are, can't we? And then we kind of go apart, and I do it, of course, at board meetings a whole lot. And so it's very important to be able to draw upon that centering reality.
Yes, and as we meditate, we're putting aside and as we go through guided imagery, we're putting aside the cares of the day, and we're just focusing on the one thing. And we teach always live in the now, keep your consciousness in present time. And so that's what meditation is in a sense, and particularly guided imagery, because they're concentrating on what the speaker is saying, and so then they're really one-pointed. And then they go into their own inner self, and they're able to meditate and to really get answers to their questions. And meditation is not just sitting quietly and doing nothing. Meditation is asking a question and then listening, and asking more things and listening ever more. And so it really is a wonderful thing to know that we can go home to God at any moment we wish. And that's what meditation basically is, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's a great way to end the program and to talk about the power of good. And during this program, we've been sharing with you some ideas and concepts that we hope have been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.